Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Badger's Heavy Hitters. You remember Sin over here? He gave you a little rundown as to what led him to this part of his story. Now this is the important part of the story because everything else sounds like he was glamifying, and he was. So would I, right? Because I did the same shit, right?
But it
in
was
a smaller scale, but
yeah.
I did similar shit. And I glorified it, you know what I mean? And I glorified prison when I got out. And I did all this and that. And some of you guys think you guys can't wait to get to prison, okay? Well, now you're going to find out why you may not want to go. So, everything's going great. Everything's starting to get a little sour. You don't have a rainy day fund set aside. You don't really got lawyer fees set aside, it sounds like.
Don't get me wrong, I had a lot of money coming in.
You were owed a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so then the market, when it crashed, a dude stepped to me and was like, hey, we could shoot some in Detroit. And I was like, okay, and I was trying to understand, how, we called it out of town. And I had no experience in out of town at that moment. And so he came to me and he was like, hey, so-and-so, we'll wheel it out there, we'll shoot them like an 80-pack, something like that. And so an 80-pack going to Detroit, I think initially we were charging them, $5,500. And I say we because it was his customer. I didn't know the people. And he was like, and he was out of Vegas, and his bro that was going to drive it there was out of Vegas. So here I am in the South Bay, and I got my Vegas. I shot my first fucking, 80 pack to Detroit. At first, they didn't know how to do it because they didn't have high-end bud like that. Where this is their first time with the Kush, so they were having difficulty selling it. I told them even at one point because they owed me a lot of money. It was like $1 million or like 900 something thousand, and I had him come to the UFC in Vegas, and I had to sit down with him, and I never met the dude, and I broke it down, and I was like, hey, this is like, it's in all the hip hop songs. What I gave you was like fucking Gucci, Louis Vuitton. It's top of the food chain. This is how you need to describe it to your customer. This is what you need to charge, and so on. And so
they were talking what, $60 an eighth, $100 an eighth, I don't know.
I don't even know like how they were breaking it down. I just knew they had like a good crew, and then it was like it was a gang, And so and I just figured once I had that conversation with him and met him the first time and broke it, like I want to say like a week later, he's like, we're done, we have all the money, let's go again. So then it was like, okay, cool, now that I lost money in LA because the market tanked, the price point on the bud, now I can recoup on sending it to Detroit. So now I'm like rocking and rolling with Detroit, and as I let's say you and I work together, I would hit you up and say, hey, do you know anybody like in any areas that you grew up with or a cousin that, obviously we can trust, that we're not like 5-0, and maybe we can shoot, other places. So it starts to kind of grow, and I went from Detroit over to Chicago, and then those two started kind of like rocking a little bit, and then the dudes in Detroit were like, hey, we have a family member in Atlanta. So before you know it, and I'm just using a car, and we're wheeling it out there, and now I'm sending it to Detroit, Chicago, and Atlanta. And then so a dude hits me up and he's like, hey, I know this guy, he's a pilot, he would be down to do the transpo. And I was like, cool, let's meet up, And so I met the pilot, and my friend who brought him to the table was like, dude, have him, do whatever it is you're gonna do. Like, he didn't even want anything. So once the pilot and I connected, he gave me like a smoking rate, dude. He was like, give me $200 on every pound I take, and I'll go anywhere, meet anyone, do anything. So I was like, awesome, bro. You know what I mean? Like, I'm locked in. Here's 300. Drop off, 70, 80 over to Detroit. Take what you have left. Drop off a few in Chicago. And so it just kept growing. And then before you know it, it just, then the pilot comes to me and he's like, hey, I'm using a little plane and I can't get above the clouds. And in those areas they have snow. I can't get above, some of the weather. He's like, I need a bigger, better, faster plane. And I was like, what is that? How much? And he's like, I need about $170,000 to buy a plane. So we agreed that I would buy the plane and then he would make payments, you know, by sometimes maybe even me paying like $100 on a pound and him paying for his own plane, you know, because in the end, like the plane, he's the pilot.
He's gonna own it.
Yeah. And so I purchased a bigger plane. Now I had people inquiring for me to go to like New York and New Jersey, but prior to that, the plane would take forever to get there because we called it a putt-putt. And it's like a little Cessna, and it's just, he's got to gas up and just get out, can't fly at night. Now that he's got the new one, I was like, can we fire up New York? And he's like, yeah, let's go. So before you know it, at one point, as I counted, I looked back in retrospect, I was selling weed in 11 states. So the feds were like, eventually caught on through someone else getting cracked. And in a roundabout way, you know, kind of like started telling them, you know, my whole get down.
So this is where the story gets interesting. If somebody knows your whole get down, that means they're sort of close to you.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So somebody got popped for a speeding ticket and say, hey, hang on, let me tell on homeboy, you know what I mean? Like,
For sure.
So that's basically what went down, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. As it does in most cases.
So when the feds get you, they got you.
For sure.
There's no fighting it. You may as well take whatever they're pretty much offering.
The-
You saw some loopholes maybe in your
Right.
head, but there weren't any.
Let me tell you how like naive I was to the whole like criminal justice and prison, right? So prior to my arrest, I always thought, oh, it's just weed. I'll land myself in LA County and maybe I'll do a term where I get a couple years, and it's so crowded in LA County. I have bros that get little shit here and there, and they kick them out. Like, oh, it's overcrowded, boom. You know, you don't have to serve really anything. So I was like, oh, no big deal. And reality is, the crazy thing is, I never even knew there was a difference.
Transportation across state lines.
Yeah, and I didn't actually know there was a difference between federal prison and state prison. Like, that's because I grew up in the beach. I didn't really like having it. I was never arrested. When I got hit by the feds, it was the very first time I ever got arrested. Other than I had got a drunk in public before. But I literally was like blessed my whole, you know, dope career. And I don't know if it's because I would wheel around and like low key when I would transport, I wouldn't be in a Porsche. I'd be in like a conservative truck, speed limit guy.
So are we,
you know?
We're like what, 7 to 10 years into this now?
Yeah. That's when I really was like flowing heavy on like, you know, taking over, you know,
2007,
like on a boss level.
2009.
On a boss, yeah.
Right.
Just when I was selling cannabis in 11 states, I was probably somewhere in the ballpark of profiting about $1 million a month. Because I would make a couple $100 grand every few days. Like,
But how much of this is actual liquid funded ether that you could feel? And how much of it was owed?
Here's the thing, at any given time, the Canadians would front it to me. So my credit line with them always hovered around me owing them 3 to 5 million was like the comfort zone. And let's say I owed them 4 million, they would always refer to it on our encrypted phone. What do you have in hand? What can you turn in? I would say, oh, I have 1.7 million, I'll turn that in. Boom, okay, I'll go drop 1.7 off. There's already another load coming, and it could potentially even be worth more than 1.7. So it's a never ending, I never zero out.
Right.
I'm just constantly turning money in. So here lies the problem. When people say, oh, you didn't bury money. Again, now I'm using the whole United States. I'm carrying all of these fronts. Like if the dude in Atlanta owes me, you know, 800,000.
I know the whole routine.
Yeah,
of what
but
you're
the
going
dude in
through.
Detroit is ready to re-up.
Right.
I'm covering this 800. So when I would go through my notepad of people that owed me money, like I remember doing this and I would say, oh, I'm owed, if everything were to quit, I'm owed 11 million. And I owe the plug like 3 million.
But you can't get paid. If you quit that,
You
you
can't.
ain't getting your money.
People, just so you know, the 11 is never coming back.
It's never coming in.
And I know that already.
I know that too.
So if I were to tell someone like, hey bro, my plug's fucking, it's over, they got clipped or whatever, everyone runs and keeps money and they, you know, they do other things.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, and these people are in other states. Some of them, you know, there was a time where I dropped a load, my first one in New York. I never even met the dude. All I had was a phone number, and I'm coordinating a drop, and the dude owes me like 1.4 million, and I'm like, I hope he pays me. I don't know where he lives.
Right.
I don't barely fucking know this guy.
Right.
You know? And so these are the kinds of things that I had going. So I guess I lost my train of thought.
It's okay. You lost your train of thought. Everything came to a crash, bro. Let's just get down to it. You know what I mean? Who cares about all the profits, all that shit?
And if I can touch on what led to the feds.
Sure.
So the feds did a bunch of far out stuff. They put GPS trackers on airplanes. They eventually infiltrated a dude, but he didn't know. So he didn't know, but he starts inviting me to hang out with agents. And they have a party in Miami on like a $5 million yacht, and they convinced me to go. The FBI agents are wearing body wires.
You're being filmed.
Being filmed, everything. And so when I was fighting my case, the government gave my lawyer CDs, compact discs, that were like fucking this thick, and it has countless wiretaps. 1,400 photos.
You're probably bumping your guns
1,100.
You should have.
Yeah, 1,100 videos. I mean, when I look back and I see, there's pictures of me standing in front of hotels. There's duffel bags being thrown onto airplanes. And it's literally like, looks like a movie when you look back at the pictures.
Like
on Fresh Out, I shot on some of those, and they have some of those pictures on there, right? And so, the
real quick. So if you haven't seen Sinister on Fresh Out, go to Fresh Out, pay Herc his respects, and catch part of his story. He's laying it out for you here too, naked and raw. We're about to get to what the foul part of the game. The game isn't always glorified. It's got 7 to 8 years into it, and things come to a crashing end. As you just said, they got him in every way imaginable. He's probably drinking a little bit.
Absolutely.
Saying what you should have said.
Absolutely, yeah.
High signing a little bit, trying to get that blondie.
Things that happened where I kind of anticipated, and I used to always be aware of my surroundings. And I started seeing the feds. I started seeing, like weird helicopters, weird cars.
Be there.
Yeah, but and as much as at the point where things were kind of hot, and I was trying to hand over the business to someone else, and I would lay more in the cut. It got bigger than me. Operating all of these states and being on the hook and had to answer to these dudes that I owe $5 million to. It's hard. Yeah, and they're in another country, and they are, although they're a big plug, they are extremely a violent crew. Let's just say.
They want their money.
Yeah. So there's no they're not like when you look at me and I'm a dude from the beach. They're the opposite. They're, like gang member style, violent, type of people.
Suits and fucking everything.
Yeah.
They still violent.
Yeah. So there's a scenario that goes along with that. So when the time came, I happened to be in Chicago, and I had all of these drops going on. Like I had a drop in Detroit with a pilot, and then he was going to scoot over to Chicago, and I was going to probably meet up with him for dinner, and so. As I'm making my calls for the day, everyone's phone is powered off, like straight to voicemail, straight to voicemail, straight to voicemail. And I was like, So I always had a lawyer that I did, that I would have him run backgrounds, do things, check me, do things, you know what I mean? And so he's like, hey, there's an indictment, because he asked me, he's like, what's the pilot's name? And I told him the pilot's name, he's like, hey, there's an indictment, it's out of such and such state. And it has I think 18 or 20 people. You're not on it. But then he said there could be such thing as I think it's called a silent or a secret indictment, which is not like public domain where no one can go in there. So, but I can go on a commercial flight. Like I jump on, a plane and then I get clinked up. So he's like, I don't totally know. So I'm just like, wow, these guys are all clipped. Everyone's. And I was used to the pilot having his phone turned off, and that was always scary for me because I never knew if he was busted. When he was flying,